So hello and welcome back. As we mentioned last week, we were going to be discussing other types of substance-related addictive and impulse control disorders. We know our typical prescribed medications as well as the legal and illicit medications, but today we're going to talk about not only the types of medications and legal and illegal drugs that are out there, but we're going to talk specifically about the substance-related addictive and impulse control disorders, along with the types of drugs that may be depressants, stimulants, that sort of thing, and the side effects or withdrawal symptoms of these types of drugs and or medications, and ways that we can go ahead and obtain resources for these types of disorders. So let's go ahead and get started. Now, let's go to the next slide. Let's talk about depressants. Growing up and being an undergraduate, I remember hearing about depressants for the first time and thinking, why would anybody want to take a medication that makes you sad and or depressed? It didn't make any sense to me, quite frankly. And that was my understanding of depressants at the time, prior to starting my undergraduate degree. Now, once I took the courses and once I went into my graduate degree, I understood a bit more about what specifically are depressants. So let's delve a little bit deeper. Now, depressants, what are they? They are known as substances that lower the activity in a person's central nervous system. So what do people usually use depressants for, you may ask? Typically, depressants are used to relax and to maybe lower a person's functions and kind of lower inhibitions, so to speak. So those are what depressants really do. And it's interesting to point out, just thinking about this information, that depressants aren't just exactly, as we may think they might be. They might not be exactly the type of, way to just make somebody sad, for example, or that sort of thing. So let's go ahead and look a little bit deeper into depressants, okay? All right, let's see here. So the types of depressants. There are many varieties of depressants and substances. Now, these are the four that are described in your book. One of them is alcohol, and alcohol has been known as one of the major depressants for a very long time. We also have benzodiazepines. It's a little hard of a word to go ahead and describe, but we'll get deeper into that as well. There's cannabis and also heroin. Now, let's talk about alcohol. Now, alcohol is something that growing up, I remember being in parties or, social gatherings with my family and seeing people drink alcohol. And just seeing how they went from maybe being kind of like a social butterfly and not being so boisterous or happy. When they started drinking alcohol, having just more, it seemed like they just had more fun, And typically when you look at advertisements that have to do with alcohol, it has to do with, young people having, first of all, being over the age of 21, but having fun and enjoying life. And as for example, Corona commercials for that type of beer show being in front of Island Paradise and having a Corona with lime. So that's what typically is described, and shown in social media and also in advertising. So with alcohol, the effects begin as a stimulant. So as I mentioned before, when I went to parties, I would see people drinking and having fun. So it was a sort of stimulant. But alcohol is actually considered a depressant. And the reason why it's considered a depressant is because it is a substance that slows or depresses the inhibition center in our brains. So when we are sober and we're a social butterfly and we don't really want to talk to anybody, or we're in karaoke and we don't want to sing because we're you might be embarrassed of what you might do. When you start taking alcohol, it sort of kind of like slows down that part of the brain that says, oh, you shouldn't do that. You're going to be embarrassed. And it makes us feel like, you know what, it's okay. And I can go ahead and sing karaoke in front of people, that sort of thing. So as the person continues drinking alcohol, this substance slows further areas of our brain. So it's not just the inhibition center of our brains that it affects other areas of our brain as well as our body. And we'll get into that in the next couple slides. Now let's also take a look at a standard drink. Now, what is a standard drink? Here is a couple of illustrations of different types of drinks. And for example, here we're talking about 5% of alcohol would be considered 12 ounces of beer, or having a glass of wine, during a meal. 5 ounces of wine is considered 12% of alcohol. 8 ounces of malt liquor would be considered about 8% alcohol, and 1.5 ounces of spirits would be considered 40% of alcohol. So a standard drink, for example, in the United States, consists about 14 grams of alcohol. So it's about equivalent to about 0.6 fluid ounces or 1.2 tablespoons. So that's considered to be a standard drink. Now, you've seen places like, for example, if you've gone to Las Vegas, you've seen people with big tubs of, slushy with alcoholic, beverages like with tequila or some type of alcoholic beverage, and of course that's a lot bigger and may have more alcohol, but that's the standard drink based on what you would see normally. Now let's take a look at this next slide. This next slide shows how alcohol not only affects part of the brain that has to do with inhibitions and other parts of the brain, but it also affects, as you can see here, your mental health. It can be used to relax yourself, but it's also addictive and can lead to dependency, as we are very well aware of. It can affect our nervous system, so it can impair our judgment and concentration, and long-term use of alcohol can also damage nerves that are associated with our brain as well. Now, it affects our eyes. Now, being a bit impaired or drunk, as they say, can cause us to have blurred vision and vision problems during the time that we have this depressant in our system. Now, it also affects the lungs because being drunk or having that alcohol use typically can increase the risk of infections in our lungs. It also affects our heart. As we can see in this illustration, at low levels, it can be beneficial for the heart, as are studies that have to do with red wine after dinner, a small glass of red wine. But at higher levels, it can actually be harmful for the heart. So that's also something to take into consideration. It affects our liver, and the long-term use of alcohol can damage our liver. And if anybody is familiar with the word cirrhosis of the liver, that's where it causes damage that cannot be fixed in the future. So that's something that we need. We need our liver, and with chronic and overuse of alcohol, it may damage our liver permanently. It also affects our pancreas. So when we use alcohol heavily, it can cause chronic, like pancreatitis, as I mentioned, which is inflammation and damage to the pancreas and the pancreas areas. Now, it also affects our stomach and, believe it or not, our food pipe. Too much alcohol can have long-term or short-term effects on our esophagus, which would be our food pipe, and the stomach area as well. Now, it also affects our intestines. So it affects both the small intestines, the large intestines, by long-term alcohol abuse. And it could increase our cancer risk. And it affects also our kidneys, as the function of our kidneys as well. Now, the bones and muscles, believe it or not, are also affected by alcohol because it actually affects our coordination. So it would affect us in the sense of, if you notice when somebody's stopped for a field sobriety check, for example, and you see that they're stumbling or they're falling, we are more prone to have injury or incidents, and that could affect our bones and our muscles. Now, in women, it actually affects our breasts, and in long-term use, it can increase our risk of breast cancer. The mouth and throat, as we had mentioned with the stomach and food pipe, are also affected. It could cause slurred speech. So many times you hear people that are a bit inebriated or drunk, and you don't understand what they're saying. And that's because it affects our motor skills to be able to talk, and our throat as well. Now, on the skin, it also has effects that are indirectly and can be directly from our skin as well. Now, all these things are things that are affected by alcohol use. Now, occasional alcohol abuse, not abuse, but use would not be something that would be affected greatly. But as you can see, with prolonged use of alcohol, not only is the brain affected, but almost the whole entire body, in a sense, is affected by alcohol use. So we'll talk later on about other things that this suppressant does, but for now, I'd like for you to just take a look at this and be able to recognize just the different areas that are affected by alcohol use. And we'll talk about the rest later. Thank you so much, and see you next time.